What's going on, everybody? My name is Matthew Minkler, and this is Controversial Football Talk. Are the Arizona Cardinals flying under the radar to possibly be a contender for the NFC title? Let's discuss. In today's video, we'll be discussing whether or not the Arizona Cardinals really are a secret contender or a sleeping team to possibly win the NFC conference and go to the Super Bowl this year. You might be wondering to yourself, or even laughing and saying, there's absolutely no shot of the Cardinals going to the Super Bowl, and there's absolutely no shot of them winning the NFC conference. They're probably not even going to make the playoffs. But what if I told you you only feel that way because you have no idea about the Cardinals' stats and statistics of this last season, and that you have no idea what really happened this offseason for the Cardinals? I feel like most major sports medias just seem to keep the Cardinals out of their mouth. They don't really let anybody know what's going on. So it's always a big surprise to people if the Cardinals end up being really good. But what if I told you that the Cardinals really do have a chance to make a Super Bowl push this season? And you might be wondering, well, Kyler Murray's not that guy, but I think he can be. There's a lot of things that he needs to work on overall, but I think he can really be a Super Bowl winning quarterback if he's given the right pieces around him. Just like every other quarterback in the NFL. You give Lamar Jackson the right pieces, and maybe one day he'll actually beat Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. You give Josh Allen the right pieces, well, maybe he'll finally beat Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes in the postseason. It's a very surprising thing for me that nobody seems to know where the Cardinals ranked last season. If I were to ask you, where did the Arizona Cardinals offense rank last year? You would probably guess that they were in the bottom half of the NFL, within the low to high 20s, maybe even in the 30s. But what if I told you that the Cardinals offense was borderline top 10, and in other categories were in the top 10? See, it's a little bit of a conspiracy for me in the NFL that mainstream sports media only gives you what they enjoy, right? They don't really talk about certain teams, not because they're not good or not that they don't have a large fan base, but just because they themselves have a bias to sell. It's kind of like when they pick and choose a favorite player, right? Nobody really talks about Jalen Hurts being an elite quarterback, but after one season, Jaden Daniels is now an elite quarterback. It's just an odd thing, right? They just seem to pick and choose. So, to help you guys understand why I feel this way, let's dive into the Arizona Cardinals offseason. The Arizona Cardinals offseason was full of amazing signings. Before the draft, the Arizona Cardinals did sign defensive edge rusher Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles. A lot of people might say that's a good upgrade, but he's not an elite edge rusher. But what if I were to tell you that's because he's never given a chance to be an elite edge rusher? The most that he's ever played, snap count wise, was 54% in a single season. And what season was that? It was the season where he got 11 sacks. Double digits. And people said he's actually a pretty good defensive edge rusher. But he's never really been given, other than that one season, which he got those 11 sacks without even being a starter. Someone got hurt, and he had to replace him on the defensive line. And when he was given that shot, he made the most of it. His numbers in Philly look pretty similar to the numbers of Chandler Jones when he was with New England. New England felt like Chandler Jones wasn't ever going to be an elite edge rusher. See, when Chandler Jones was with the New England Patriots, he wasn't really considered an elite edge rusher in the National Football League. But when he came to Arizona and he dominated offensive linemen, people really started to understand, well, Chandler Jones just wasn't given the right opportunity, and he wasn't in the right scheme. But I believe under Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis, and their evolution as defensive coordinator for Nick Rawls and a head coach for Jonathan Gannon, I think that Josh Sweat will have a 15-sack season. Mark my words. Now let's move on to the next big free agent signing in Dalvin Tomlinson. Now, he's not completely and utterly a game wrecker, but what he is that he's a great big body to stuff run gaps, which is what the Cardinals need, right? They need big bodies to stuff the run, so that way the edge rushers and the linebackers and other defensive linemen can make an impact to get to the quarterback, especially with exotic blitzes. That rarely could be a thing if they have an elite front four. Now, on top of Dalvin Tomlinson, they decided, you know what? Let's re-sign Calais Campbell, the ex-Cardinal, that the previous regime did a horrible job with letting go. I mean, how do you let go of a guy who... The fact is that the previous regime literally let a two-time Pro Bowler at the time go because they felt like he was done. Turns out he would be named 4 more Pro Bowls and is now part of the NFL's All-Decade team. So when you have a guy like that, you say, well, yeah, but he's old, so don't expect a lot of production from him. Well, he did say openly, stating that he's not there to be the main guy, that he is a rotational piece. But even in Miami as a rotational piece last season, he did have 6 sacks, which led all defensive linemen in the NFL. That's a big surprise. And that's pretty staggering for a guy who's almost 40 years old. You see, it's a very surprising thing to me that people continuously downplay the Cardinals. So after doing that, a lot of people felt like, well, the Cardinals' defensive line, it's revamped, it's good, we don't need to get anything else, until the draft came along. And Cardinals drafted defensive lineman Walter Nolen. Walter Nolen is a very underrated defensive lineman as is. I mean, some people had him as a top 10 draft pick, and somehow he fell to 16 for the Cardinals. Shortly after that, he then drafted, and by he I mean Monty Ossenfort drafted Will Johnson in the 2nd round, a talent that people said in some draft boards were ranked in the top 10 again. And everybody talking about the main reason why he fell was for his knee injury, which was very odd because his knee injury really was a ghost one. He didn't have a knee injury last season at all. There was no knee injury from Michigan this last season before the draft. Ian Rappaport reported that Will Johnson had knee problems, but he doesn't have knee problems. See, last season, the games he missed were due to a shoulder injury and a toe injury. Nothing involving the knee. It's a very odd thing to me that they just make up stories. Like Ian Rappaport flat lied. He just made up a story about a knee injury that he had 2 years ago. So it doesn't make any sense to me that he wouldn't be an elite cornerback of the National Football League. Does it make him injury prone because he's had a knee injury and now he's had a shoulder injury and he's also had a toe injury? Yes, it does make him injury prone, but everybody was talking about the knee, but the knee's been fine. It was perfectly fine. He had no issues with it last season, and the main reason why he missed those games was due to a shoulder or toe injury. It had nothing to do with his knee. On top of that, then they draft Jordan Burch, which for me was a big surprise to go again defensive lineman. And after that, they grabbed another corner out of Ohio State in Denzel Burke, a guy who covered elite talents his entire college career. And up until this last season, he was considered a top 15 draft pick. The only reason why he fell was because of a horrible game that he had against Oregon. And that was about it. He had a couple other bad games this last season, which really tanked his draft stock. But that might be a massive hit. A lot of people are talking about him being a special teamer specifically. Probably in the beginning, yes. But I wouldn't be surprised if you saw him out there rotating with a guy like Starling Thomas. It's just a very surprising thing. Now, you're like, now all those amazing defensive acquisitions, pardon myself, are great, but what about offense? The Cardinals' offense last year struggled a lot, right? Wrong. The Cardinals' offense didn't struggle. They actually led the NFC West in points. That's right. No other team in the NFC West scored more points than the Arizona Cardinals. Did you know that? You probably didn't, because nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about how the Cardinals were ranked 11th in offense. 11 in total offense, involving yards. Also ranked 11th in total points. Nobody talks about that. They were ranked number 8 in third down conversions. That's a really good number, inside the top 10. And ranked number 7 in run offense. And you're like, well, their pass offense was just atrocious. Well, they weren't even in the top 20 pass offense. They were ranked number 18, just outside the top 15. And red zone offense was ranked number 17. Not amazing, but that's around the middle of the pack. And remember, they are a run-first team. So, of course, they're going to have better running statistics than passing statistics. So, after all of those numbers, why are the Cardinals not talked about as a real contender or threat this upcoming season of the National Football League? To me, it makes no sense. Now, you might be saying, well, you're a Cardinal fan, so you're biased. I've always been an honest Cardinal fan, knowing when my team's going to suck. Even in 2021, I never felt comfortable. When the Cardinals were winning all those games and Kyler Murray was doing all this stuff, I still felt very uncomfortable about the Cardinals. And I knew it was basically like a house of cards. A little bit of wind and the whole thing comes crashing down, because Cliff Kingsbury is not a good head coach. He's a good offensive mind, but he's not a good head coach. And Steve Keim was a really bad general manager for the Cardinals for lots of years, where he just didn't know how to build a team. They would sign guys who were coming out of their prime or past their prime, and they were just big name guys that the teams that they got them from were like, yeah, we don't want to deal with this guy no more because they're not worth the trouble. It's like, but then, Steve Keim sees a name and just jumps on it. And I think that's a main portion of just even sports media, right? Like NFL Insiders or Good Morning Football, or you can go to CBS Sports, NBC Sports, Fox Sports, any one of these major, sports media outlets. And I guarantee you that the Arizona Cardinals aren't even on their radar. Most of the sports media just kind of talk about players like they used to be, right? Like they have a thought in their mind, whether it's players or teams. Like, it took a few years for the Patriots, to realize that Patriots suck again. Like it took a few years for them to suck, for people in the mainstream sports media to be like, oh, okay, they're not good anymore, because they were kind of nostalgic. And I feel that way for like a lot of other players and teams. Like I feel like, people are talking about Aaron Rodgers still being a good enough quarterback to lead the Steelers to anything. We saw him with good talent around him and with the Jets, and he was trash. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, he had Devontae Adams, and, on paper, he had a bunch of good talent on offense. They had a good running back. They had a decent offensive line on paper. It's just with him at the epicenter, they weren't good. They sucked. And everybody's blaming the Jets, right? Nobody's even thinking about Aaron Rodgers being the reason. Aaron Rodgers is the reason, because he's not a guy who can win you a Super Bowl. Even prime Aaron Rodgers wasn't that guy to win you a Super Bowl, for crying out loud. And it's just an odd thing to see in sports media, that everybody's still talking about the Niners. Half their team's gone and they're still talking about them. They're still the favorites and betting odds to win the NFC West, even over the Rams, who just won the NFC West. It just kind of makes no sense to me. I think that the main competition for the Cardinals isn't the Niners or the Seahawks. I think it's clearly the Rams, and I think the Cardinals can beat them. They beat them once last year, and they should have beat them a second time in Los Angeles. Just in LA, they should have beat them. It was a ball that bounced off of Trey McBride's helmet. It was just a little too high for him, but in reality, he should have caught that ball regardless. But if that doesn't happen and that's not picked off, they actually live to see another down, and they might have scored and won the game. But nobody talks about that. What about the Vikings game? Everybody blames the Cardinals, Kyler Murray, for sucking against the Vikings. But in reality here, it had nothing to do with Kyler Murray. It had everything to do with the defense giving up a 4th down conversion on 4th and 12, where Sam Darnold had, I think, 12 seconds to throw the football, and they picked up the 4th down. Without that conversion, the Cardinals win that game, literally. But because it's not up to, I guess, us as sports fans to talk about, what's going on with Kyler Murray and, who's to blame for certain losses and this, that, or the other. I hear a lot of people talking about how how Kyler lost the Cardinals, 4 or 5 games, and the Vikings game is one of them. And that to me is absolutely not. The Rams game, it wasn't Kyler who lost you that game. It was a freaking bounce off the helmet that ended up getting picked. And in reality, it was a Trey McBride problem. He should have caught the ball. That is a ball that any major tight end needs to make that catch. And he said that after the game. He said, it was completely my fault. I should have caught the ball. So, that's 2 games that people said the Cardinals lost because Kyler just played like garbage, not knowing that the tight end dropped a ball that ended up getting picked off after the drop. And then the defense sucking and giving up, big plays down the stretch of a game that they just shouldn't be doing. So at the end of the day, it's who do you really blame for the Cardinals not being good? It's do you blame Kyler Murray for losing games? No, for me, I really don't, because this last season, it showed that he wasn't trying to be Superman anymore, and that was a great thing for me. I loved seeing him not be Superman, at least not trying to be, where he doesn't need to make the most ridiculous throws and the most ridiculous plays all the time. When you rely on your quarterback to do that, it does not amount to wins. If you don't believe me, you can go ahead and look at Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, okay? They are guys who put the cape on and are asked to put the cape on by their organizations too frequently, and they cannot win in the playoffs. So, at what point do people go, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be putting all this pressure on that. It's Tom Brady wasn't the most athletic guy, but for some reason we're talking about athletic quarterbacks like they're the main thing. Tom Brady wasn't, didn't have the strongest arm, but we're talking about guys how they need to have, crazy body control and throw on the run and sidearms. That's something that's necessary. Patrick Mahomes is the first quarterback to play that way and win a Super Bowl. Every other QB that's ever played the style of quarterback that Patrick Mahomes plays has never won a Super Bowl. Let's look at the numbers of guys that do that, who are asked to put the cape on too frequently, and this last season with the Chiefs, too many times he put the cape on, and eventually it bit him in the butt. It took the Super Bowl to do it, but it bit him in the butt, and they got absolutely stomped because of it, But through the season, The Chiefs have always been asking him to just be freaking, Superman all the time and to never take the cape off and to always be that. It's like, and eventually it bit him in the butt, and I just think that for the Cardinals, I think that it's a smart play to just run the football, have a good run offense, and go off the play action. And I would say 55 to 45%. 55% runs, 45% passes. That was about their numbers last season, and everybody's been upset about it. You're not giving them the ball as much, and you're not throwing the ball, all these stuff. And it's like what Kyler said, it was actually not a lot about that. It was more about needing to execute those plays, not to call more of them, right? And not have more opportunities, because they had plenty of opportunities. But the issue is that they never actually were able to capitalize on those opportunities. That's going to be the point this season for the offense. But if the offense runs it all back and everything stays exactly the same, and the Cardinals have a top 10 defense, they're going to the playoffs. They're winning the division, and they might even go to the Super Bowl. So what are their odds for going to the Super Bowl? In my opinion, I'd say it's about a 60% chance. And that's a high percentage, right? And you're like, again, you're a Cardinal fan, so you don't count. Well, in my opinion, that's all that matters. That I'm the Cardinal fan. And I have never once said my Cardinals are going to the Super Bowl this year. Ever. Even when the Cardinals went to the NFC Championship game in 2015 and played the Carolina Panthers, when they went to Carolina, I knew they were going to lose that game. I had no faith in that team. There is something different in the air about this team this year. And quote me now, the Cardinals will win the NFC West. And when they do, and they end up pushing to the NFC Championship game, and you're going to see Arizona playing whatever team in the NFC Championship game, it's going to be a big, big deal for everyone. And a big surprise for everyone but me. Remember, you heard it here first. At Controversial Football Talk. My name is Matthew Minkler. Thank you so much for watching my video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and click that bell icon for notifications. I'll see you in my next upload.